Back on the record, the time is 1:01 p.m.
Hey, good afternoon. So this is marked as Exhibit, I think, 11. And let me give copies. Okay. So I've handed you an email and attachment. The email is marked MNKT1558193. The attachment was produced in native, and it's MNKT1558195. So my first question is, what is the analysis that's being performed or represented in this attachment?
Can you give me a second to read?
Sure,
the,
of course.
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm ready for you.
Great. And so my first question is a general one. What's the analysis that's being performed or represented in this attachment?
Sure. So I'm reading through detailed oxy-IR sales for the 3 distributors referenced in the letter. Let me see. I don't know.
I don't believe the letter was attached to
Yeah.
this. We just have the spreadsheet.
I was just looking at the spreadsheet to even see if I could ascertain. So I don't know what the distributors are or what that reference is, but basically, so it says the indirect customer sourcing for more than 2 distributors. And could you repeat your question again? I'm so sorry.
Sure. I'm just trying to understand what's the analysis
Sure.
that's being performed.
Got it. We were in a position where we had started to, so the chargeback data that we had historically was used for financial reasons. It served as the delta that we talked about between the WAC and the contract price, and that was the mechanism that financial transaction was, executed on. And as we moved further into analysis of the Oxy sales, and as evidenced by the information we shared prior to lunch, we started digging in more to the chargeback data to understand and by end purchaser, I'll say the pharmacy that's purchasing through the distributor.
And is that also known as the indirect customer?
It's not, because your indirect customer is actually, it can be, yes. Because your indirect, I don't know, we would never have called it, it's your end purchaser. So it's
Okay.
the customer that's purchasing or the pharmacy that's purchasing through the wholesaler or through the distributor.
So your customer's customer?
Yes.
Okay.
And so we were in a position whereas we had started to identify the heavier indexed sales within the state of Florida, we started driving into the actual pharmacies that were purchasing our product and trying to get a gauge on, the hard part was we could only see what a particular pharmacy was buying from us, so we didn't have a viewpoint into what their total purchases were. So it was tough for us to ascertain if what they were buying from us was relatively high or not, because we didn't have the total picture. But one way that we thought we could start to see if there was an issue with the pharmacy is if you saw them pulling our product, but from multiple sources. So from buying it from multiple spots, and so it was just another way to try to slice the data that we had visibility to, and that was it, to see if we could identify any trends within pharmacy purchasing.
And why focus on, or what was the significance of a pharmacy getting your product from multiple different sources?
So the thought is that distributor, we were allocating to people, and the thought was they were allocating to pharmacies. So if a pharmacy had higher, this is our thought again, but if they had demand that a certain distributor or wholesaler wouldn't service them, they're going to multiple sources to club together to meet their demand. And we didn't know if it was the sign of a suspicious behavior within a customer. It was just another way of us trying to put together the data to identify where if there was a trend within the state of Florida in terms of the pharmacies that were pulling our product.
And pharmacies that were obtaining your product from multiple different wholesalers would be, I mean, one thing, you might want to subject those to increased scrutiny. Is that fair?
And I think we need to take a step back. So we sold to the wholesaler distributor, and then they ultimately made the decision to sell our product onto the pharmacy or the end purchaser. It was they were making that decision. This was more for us to start to, and I don't know what the three were, but this was more for us to start to ascertain if there was a trend within these particular people that we were selling to, in terms of then who they were selling to.
And taking a step back, if you identified pharmacies that you had questions about, one thing you could do is ask the distributors that were providing to those pharmacies about the pharmacies. Is that correct?
That would be a potential option.
And do you recall if Mallinckrodt ever did that at one point?
In terms of providing lists of pharmacies to wholesalers or distributors that we had concerns about?
Yes, or asking a distributor about a specific pharmacy that you had concerns about.
Gotcha. I don't remember if we did or did not do that.
Okay. Do you think it would be a good thing to do?
I don't know if it would or wouldn't be. Ultimately, how a distributor or wholesaler sets up their program and runs it is their business practice. So I'm not certain that it would or would not be helpful.
And in terms of how they set up their program, you're referring in your last answer to their SOM program, correct?
Sure.
And how a distributor ran its SOM program and the effectiveness of that program, though, that was a concern for Mallinckrodt, wasn't it?
I don't remember.
Do you believe it should have been a concern for Mallinckrodt?
I think that that's a really subjective question.
Do we have 44850? Thank you. This is going to be 12. So I've handed you another email that's Bates number MNKT1448850, and it's an email from you to Jeremy again, and I wanted to direct your attention to the last sentence in the middle paragraph. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. And can you read that for me?
Yes. We're getting pressure to nail down a systematic way to monitor our end purchaser sales, and I'd like to get ahead of it.
Okay. And in terms of pressure, who was the pressure coming from?
So I think it's important. So this was in the end of 2010. So we had a suspicious order monitoring program in place that pertained to our orders, our shipments to our customers. By this point in time, the DEA had made statements to Karen Harper, and she could definitely talk to you more about this, but in terms of knowing our customer's customer. And putting the onus on manufacturers to understand the customer's customer. And if you go back to the previous email where I had started to, or we had started to drive into the pharmacy level data and seeing where they had made purchases from multiple wholesalers, we were trying to figure out how to possibly understand how we monitored our customers' customers. And at this point, that's what this email is about. The challenge, again, that I mentioned to you is that we only had visibility into what our customers were purchasing from us. So we had no way of knowing how much they were purchasing from other sources, whether, other manufacturers. And so it's challenging for us to say that, a pharmacy was purchasing too much, just based on the limited data that we had. And so this was this first exhibit 558-193 was one of the ways that we were trying to get to the bottom of how to tackle that question. And then this, you can see, was 5 days later, me reaching out to Jeremy, who we've spoken about before, who was in market research, to try to see if there was a different way to come at the question.
But one way to do it would be to use chargeback data. That was what was the last document was based on.
Well, and we did use chargeback data, and I think that's what I'm referencing to. So we used chargeback data down to the pharmacy level, and that's what this information was in this exhibit. But we could only see what they were buying of our product, and we had no way of ascertaining if that was or wasn't a lot. For all we knew, that pharmacy could be close to to like a hospice center, or we didn't have a systematic way in terms of evaluating the data to determine, relatively speaking, what was too much for a particular pharmacy. We could look at the chargeback data till we were blue in the face, but it only told a small portion of the story.
And in terms of the chargeback data, do you recall when you started looking at the chargeback data for this purpose?
For this purpose, I don't know when. It was sometime in 2010, it appears, but I don't know when. No.
And was it your idea to look at the chargeback data for this purpose?
I don't remember if it was my idea. I worked so closely. I don't remember if it was my idea or not.
And who did you work closely with on this project?
I worked closely with, I was working closely with Karen, because Karen Harper was actually in charge of the communications with the DEA and also in charge of compliance. So I was working closely with her. What I don't remember is what drove us because to get to this level of the chargeback data, you really had to dig into the reports. And I don't remember who or when we had the idea to do that.
And how long had you been collecting chargeback data for?
We've always collected. We had always collected chargeback data. That was something that we had always gotten, because that was a mechanism of our sales to the wholesaler in terms of when we sold product to them. So across the board, not just for Oxy, but for any product that we sold into a customer that purchased at WAC, we collected chargeback data. How we used the data and the level that we started drilling into it is what changed. So it was originally a chargeback was just a financial mechanism to net the wholesaler down to their contract price. As we moved into 2010, the end of, and I don't know when exactly. I think that was when we started to realize the information that we could gather from the chargebacks to help us understand more of our business. But when that happened and who drove it, I can't remember.
And the information that you were drilling down on,
Mm-hmm.
that was information that Mallinckrodt had in its possession by virtue of the chargeback system, right? It wasn't something that they went out and gathered specifically for this task. It's data that they were already collecting just because of how the chargeback system
It was, I wasn't in the chargeback group, so I never administered chargebacks. But from my understanding, this was information that was submitted via the chargeback.
Okay. And it was submitted by the distributors because they wanted their chargeback reimbursement.
Well, they wanted to be netted down to their contract price, yes.
Okay, do you have 27001? No. I think it's in the other one that I gave you. So, Ms. Neely, I'm handing you a document that's Bates numbered MNK T1 270081.
Okay.
And its title is Talking Points for DEA Albany and DEA St. Louis.
Okay.
And its date is November 1st, 2010. Do you recall that one of our prior exhibits referenced a possible meeting with DEA?
Yes.
Do you know if this was the meeting that was being referenced?
Can you give me an opportunity to read through this, please?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay.
Dean, could I just note for the record, I noticed that the previous exhibit 11 has a number of instances where Mallinckrodt's in-house counsel, Donald Lohman, as well as Pat Duft, are on the email. So I just wanted to preserve our rights. We're going to look into whether that's subject to clawback. I just
Okay.
want to note that for the record.
Okay. And so, Ms. Neely, have you had a chance to review this document?
I have.
And I believe a prior document referenced a possible meeting with DEA roughly in this time frame. Do you
Sure.
recall that?
The previous document that we reviewed? Yes, I do remember the email.
Okay.
Yes.
And so do you know if this was that meeting?
You would assume so, based on the timing of that email versus the date at the top of this document. I don't know for 100% certain.
And does this refresh your recollection as to whether you were present or involved in this meeting?
I don't think that I was involved in this meeting.
Okay. But it's discussing the chargeback system, which is something that you were closely involved with along with Karen Harper. Is that
In terms
correct?
of the data, yes.
Okay. And then it says direct customer data. It says Cedardale Distributors, Master Pharmaceuticals, and KeySource Inc. will not be receiving any oxycodone 30 milligrams. So I'm sorry, let me put this up so it's easier to follow.
I gotcha.
For the remainder of the calendar year.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know why those three distributors were identified in this doc, or why the meeting focused on those three distributors?
I don't So those were the 3 distributors that we chose not to sell the 30 milligram to anymore because of the disproportionate amount of sales going through the state of Florida on that particular product. I did not create this document, so I can't tell you exactly why they were noted on here. My assumption, coming from my position, would have been for that reason.
Okay. And so, and the decision was made that you did to completely cut off sales to these 3 entities. Is that correct?
According to this document, yes.
Though it does say remainder of the calendar year, do you recall what happened, I guess, in 2011?
I don't, because I left the company in January of 2011.
Okay. Given these concerns, would you be surprised if they resume sales to these entities in 2011?
That would be pure speculation on my part. I don't think that's going to help you.
Well, given your knowledge of these issues and your involvement in this process, would you have recommended resuming sales to these entities in 2011?
Object to the form.
There was obviously a decision, there was a reason that drove the decision in 2010 to stop shipping them. So I do think that had I been with the company in 2011, that this would have been something that would have required further discussion about resuming shipment to these 3 particular customers.
Then for the indirect customer data, and I take it, what we're talking about here is, or in this context, is the end purchasers. Is that accurate?
They reference the pharmacies, so yes.
Okay. It says Mallinckrodt has no knowledge of these pharmacies or their business model. Mallinckrodt is developing algorithms to be used in evaluating dosage units purchased upon zip code and other information.
Mm-hmm.
And so these were algorithms that would be used on pharmacies, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And were you involved in the development of those algorithms?
So when you and I spoke about the previous 2 exhibits, so talking about running the chargeback level data down to whether or not a pharmacy was buying from more than one wholesaler, also looking at the zip code information that in the email to Jeremy Stamer. So I was involved in the initial discussions of how to develop that algorithm. This was in this paragraph in particular is what I was referencing to you in our previous conversation was about how to do this, because it was challenging. We were trying to figure out how to wrap our arms around it. It had not been established by the time I left the company, but they were definitely working on it and trying to figure out how to do it.
We have the attachments. Great. Yeah, well, all right. Okay. so Ms. Neely, I've handed you an email marked MNKT1 559192, and it also has two attachments, which I've also provided to you. One of them is Bates number 559194, and I believe the third one, which is an Excel spreadsheet, is Bates number MNKT1 559195.
Okay.
Okay, so could you please review the email?
Okay.
Okay. And do you recall writing this email? It's an email from you to Mr. Burley.
I don't recall writing it, but I have no doubt that I did.
Okay. And why did you write this email to Mr. Burley?
So H.D. Smith was one of our wholesalers, and they had, according to this email, shut down several pharmacies, or stopped selling to several pharmacies. And we had obtained that list, and then I was able to run sales based on that. And if you look at the chart behind it, you can see the direct correlation of the drop in H.D. Smith sales and the increase to KeySource. So it showed that KeySource was picking up the business that H.D. Smith had walked away from.
And was this of concern to you?
I don't know if concern is the right word, but if you read my email, it says attached is a list of the customers that they either shut down or severely restricted. We're not suggesting that KeySource adhere to H.D. Smith's methods, but thought it might be helpful to have a list of accounts that a similar business has deemed suspicious. So it was more of a call out to KeySource in terms of saying, hey, H.D. Smith has deemed these not customers they want to sell to, and KeySource, you're starting to sell to them. It was more of a trying to help them, because they wouldn't have had visibility into H.D. Smith stopping shipment to these particular customers.
And do you see at the bottom of the page you say, Steve asked H.D. Smith how they identified these accounts, and H.D. Smith noted the following, and then you have 5 bullet points.
Yes.
Can you read that first bullet point to me?
Sure. C2 ratio to normal non-scheduled product orders.
Okay. And what did you mean by that?
That was not me that wrote that, so that was verbatim, it looks like, from H.D. Smith.
Okay, well, did you understand what that meant?
In terms of C2 ratio to normal non-scheduled product orders?
Yes.
They were saying as a percent to total, in terms of product orders for all products, seeing a higher ratio of C2 products.
Okay. And would you agree that that is information to consider in evaluating a pharmacy?
According to H.D. Smith, they felt like it was information to consider.
And would you agree with H.D. Smith in that regard?
That was H.D. Smith's business practice. H.D. Smith also had the benefit of selling the entire gamut of generic drugs, so outside of Schedule 2, Schedule 3, scheduled drugs. So they had the benefit of having a really broad portfolio that they were selling, so it was easier for them to identify a high ratio, or what seemed to be a high ratio of Schedule 2 drugs to aggregate, because they had such a broad portfolio that they were selling. So in that sense, it made sense that that would be the way they would evaluate their orders to pharmacies.
Though if a pharmacy was only ordering, for example, Oxy 30 from a distributor, wasn't that an issue to look at?
So
Object to the form.
yeah,
Okay.
no, it's fine. And I think that the C2 ratio to normal non-scheduled product orders, I mean, that's exactly what you just said, right?
Yes, so that, well, I guess I'd put it another way. If the CT ratio to normal non-scheduled orders was essentially, 100% on the CT2 side, that would be something to look at.
I mean, I can't speak to that. It's challenging. What if a pharmacy was right next to a hospice center and they serviced only, the pain patients? I mean, it's tough to say that would be a red flag. H.D. Smith identified it as one. I can't say or not say if that would be.
Though, do you recall the key source email?
Are we talking about this email in particular?
No, let me try to.
Oh, you're talking about my email that bulleted out the 94% to total sales and
Yes.
100% for the past 3 months.
That email.
Yes.
I mean, one of the bases for cutting off key source was that they were supplying a pharmacy with, a pharmacy was getting 100% oxy from, that was their only order, right? So isn't that of concern?
So are we talking about our business practices or are we talking about H.D. Smith's business practices?
Well, we're talking, I don't think we're talking about any particular business practice. I think we're talking as a general matter and for purposes of developing potential screens to identify, pharmacies that could be problematic. Isn't one of the things that it's reasonable to look at whether the pharmacy is only purchasing, oxycodone from a distributor?
We did look at that, so I think you have the answer to that question, which is yes, we thought that was a reasonable item to evaluate.
Okay, and so with respect to this first bullet point, which is the CT ratio to normal non-scheduled product orders, you would agree that's something to look at?
Well, this is, again, H.D. Smith and the way they do business, so I can't speak to how they do business. Within our book of business, that was something that we evaluated.
Okay. And so let's look at the second bullet point. If the pharmacy was closed door servicing just physicians, what does that mean to you?
That part, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. What about the third bullet point, large pharmacies with excess orders? What is your interpretation of, or what did you mean when you copied that into your email?
I think it's really challenging for you to have me interpret these words when they're not my words, when I did just literally copy and paste them into an email. So you just asked me, what does that mean when you copied that in? It means I took somebody else's words and I cut and paste them into an email. So it's really challenging for me to sit here and tell you what the person meant by that. It would be my interpretation.
Okay, so when I previously asked you if you recall writing this email, you indicated that you don't recall writing it, correct? Do you remember that?
I said I did not recall writing this email.
Okay, so then how do you know that you just cut and pasted these?
I
Kept
said
to the form.
Yeah, and I said H.D. Smith noted the following, so it was me dropping in what H.D. Smith said.
And you dropped it in without any understanding of what it meant?
I was relaying what H.D. Smith had noted within their order monitoring program.
But you intended Mr. Borelli to pass this information on to KeySource, did you not?
I did.
So doesn't that suggest that you believe the information was reliable or at least should be considered by them?
I don't think necessarily, no. I just said this is what H.D. Smith used to identify these accounts, and they noted the following. I was providing or relaying information.
And so you had no opinion as to whether any of these factors made any sense to look at?
I don't know, because I've never worked for a distributor before. I don't know how they do their business model. I don't know. So the second bullet point, if the pharmacy was closed door just servicing physicians, I don't understand what that means. But if I worked for a distributor and I operated in the sales environment, I might. So I made the assumption that H.D. Smith understood that, and by relaying it to KeySource, they would understand it too. But did I understand it? No.
Well, but one of the things that you were starting to do was look at pharmacies. You were starting to look at the customers of your customer, correct?
We were doing that, yes.
Yes, Mallinckrodt was doing that, and you were heavily involved in that process.
I was involved in the collection of the data, yeah.
So, as part of that process, weren't you required to gain some familiarity as to what a distributor would look at with respect to a pharmacy?
No.
Well, then how, if DEA's suggestion to Mallinckrodt is you need to better understand your customer's customer, then doesn't that in part require you to have some knowledge of what a distributor looks at with respect to evaluating its customer? I mean, how else are you going to understand your customer's customer?
Object to the form.
Yeah, I don't think that that's how a distribution or how a distributor evaluates their customer. That's how they operate their business. In terms of knowing our customer's customer, I did work with the data and I did provide that to Karen and to that team. But from my perspective, in terms of these different qualifying factors, this was not something that was in my wheelhouse, no.
Well, was there another Mallinckrodt employee that this would have been in their wheelhouse?
I can't speak to that, I don't know.
So, rereading your testimony, you say how a distribution or how a distributor evaluates their customer, that's how they operate their business. And wasn't DEA essentially telling Mallinckrodt that this was also now part of Mallinckrodt's concern, Mallinckrodt's business as well?
I can't speak to that. You would have to talk to Karen Harper, as she had the direct conversations with the DEA.
Well, but Karen Harper told you, did she not, that the DEA expected Mallinckrodt to know its customer's customer?
She did relay that to me, yes.
And so what did you understand that to mean in terms of Mallinckrodt's obligations with respect to its knowledge of pharmacies?
I think that that was where we were at the beginning of whenever I left the company. So we were in the process of trying to understand that and identify methodologies to understand our customer's customer. And I think that, in the documents that you and I just reviewed within the previous attachments, I think that that shows our first steps. Now, in terms of this information, I don't know if or how this information was used in addition to the data that I was pulling. I don't know that.
Okay, but the first bullet point, the CT ratio to normal non-scheduled product orders, that is information that would be helpful to understanding your customer's customer. Would you agree
Yeah,
with that?
because you, absolutely. And I think that we referenced that in the document when we talked about key source. So that was one item that we were already starting to evaluate. But I think you were talking more about the second bullet point, which I don't have as much information on.
Okay. Well, let's look at the third bullet point then, large pharmacies with excess orders.
Yep.
Is that something that would be useful in terms of knowing your customer's customer?
I don't know what large pharmacies with excess orders means.
What about the fourth bullet point, which is no physician sales?
So, and I don't understand what that means either. Because if you look at that in conjunction with bullet point number 2, they almost essentially contradict each other. So that part I don't understand. Again, this was from a distributor, and it was talking about the way they do business. I don't, at this time, did not understand, and still don't understand, how distributors go to market. So for me, this information did not necessarily make sense in terms of the business that we were operating, but my thought was this would be good information to relay to KeySource since we had seen the uptick in demand from them.
And so looking at one of the attachments, I think this is going to be, and my apologies, that's not Bates' number, it's 559195. So this is a list of pharmacies pharmacies that H.D. Smith either cut off or severely restricted. Are we on the same page?
It doesn't have an exhibit number listed on it, but I think we must be.
Okay.
So I said attached is a list of customers that they have either shut down or severely restricted. So I would have to make the assumption that this is the attachment.
Yes, so I'll represent to you this is that list.
Okay.
And this is a list that you wanted forwarded to KeySource for their consideration.
That's what I said in my email.
Okay. Would you be concerned if KeySource continued to do business with these pharmacies?
I can't say if I would be concerned or not concerned. H.T. Smith had made the decision based on their criteria to not sell to them. Whether or not H.T. Smith's business practices were overly conservative or, KeySource should have adhered to them, I can't speak to that.
Well, and to be clear, these are pharmacies that H.T. Smith had made the decision not to sell to based on the grounds that they were suspicious, correct?
They were
Check to the
suspicious,
farm.
yeah, and they were
Yeah.
suspicious according to H.T. Smith.
Yes. And so,
Which doesn't necessarily mean they're universally suspicious. They were suspicious to H.G. Smith.
well, but why would a pharmacy on this list be suspicious to H.D. Smith but not suspicious to anyone else?
Object to the form.
Yeah, I don't know because I didn't work at H.D. Smith, so I don't know.
So if it turned, well, let's look at the other attachment, which I believe is a graph. It's modeled, or it's Bates numbered 559194. You see that?
I do.
And so the squares are KeySource Medical, and the dots are H.D. Smith Wholesale.
That's correct.
So what is this graph showing?
So this graph is, and I think the email is evidence, backing this up. It says, per our conversation, please find attached the graph showing the transition of Oxy sales from H.D. Smith to KeySource as of the last several months. And so it was showing the transition of these pharmacies from H.D. Smith to KeySource, and that was graphically depicting that.
Okay. And so the fact that KeySource was doing business with a large number of pharmacies that H.D. Smith concluded were suspicious wasn't a concern for Mallinckrodt?
Again, I didn't work for H.D. Smith, and so I can't speak to how or why and what their business practices were.
So the answer then is no. Mallinckrodt was not concerned that KeySource was doing business with a large number of pharmacies that H.D. Smith declined to do business with or severely restricted that business with because they were suspicious.
Object to the form.
Yeah. H.D. Smith made decisions not to sell to these accounts, and KeySource was selling to those accounts. And we felt like we should share with KeySource that another one of its competitors had made the decision not to service them. Now, why H.D. Smith did that and whether KeySource should have adhered to the same approaches, can't speak to that.
And so you had no concerns at all that Mallinckrodt's products via KeySource were making their way to a large number of pharmacies that H.D. Smith concluded were suspicious, correct?
Object to the form.
Yeah. And I think, and just in all due respect, I think we did, because we eventually stopped selling to KeySource. So we notified them and said, hey, these are accounts that appear to be, that H.D. Smith has deemed suspicious. We don't know what their business practices are or why. Communicated that, and you can see this is in August, and then by the end of October, we had stopped selling to them. So I don't really see where your line of questioning is trying to take me.
Well, I guess my line of questioning is I'm just trying to understand whether Mallinckrodt was concerned that KeySource was continuing to do business with customers that H.D. Smith cut off. That's really all I'm asking.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. The fact that we stopped selling to KeySource within the next 2 months after this email, doesn't that essentially answer the question that you're asking me?
I believe it does. So going beyond KeySource, if there were other distributor companies that were continuing to do business with pharmacies on this list, that would be cause for concern.
Object to the form.
Yeah. I mean, all I can say is that within 2 months of this email, so as of November 1st, 2010, which is the date of the talking points for DEA Albany and DEA St. Louis, that we had stopped selling to KeySource, we had stopped selling to Cedardale, and we had stopped selling to Masters. So I think that the fact that that was 2 months post this shows that we addressed it, and I think answers your question about whether or not we had concerns.
Okay. And so if another distributor, though, had taken up essentially KeySource's business by servicing these customers, that's something that Mallinckrodt would have considered in evaluating its relationship with that distributor. Is that, or should have considered?
I can't speak to these pharmacies in particular, but we did evaluate sales for Cedardale, Masters, and KeySource, and because of the disproportionately high sales into the state of Florida in relation to their total business, we did make the decision to stop shipping them.
And the last bullet point is pharmacy secondary supplier relations. Do you have any understanding of what that means?
I have no idea what that means.
Okay. Sorry, one more question on this. So I understand that you understand what some of these bullets mean and don't understand what others mean. In terms of developing a list to consider when ascertaining whether a pharmacy was suspicious, and this would be consistent with the request or the requirement that Mallinckrodt know its customer's customer.
Mm-hmm.
Other than the C2 ratio, would you have any other factors on that list?
Object to the form. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you would have to talk to Karen Harper. She was ultimately in charge of the compliance and the suspicious order monitoring, and creating the different criteria for the customer's customer, and she would have to speak to that.
So do we have 265441? Okay, so here's another exhibit.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is another email, Bates number MNKT1265441. This is now an email from you to Jim Roush, CC, and Karen Harper.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could take a look at it and let me know when you're done reviewing, that'd be great.
Okay.
Okay, and I have a question for you about this highlighted section.
Okay.
Okay. So could you please read that?
Sure. Then I looked at where their sales increase was coming from, parentheses, i.e. pharmacies, clinics, doctors, etc., in parentheses, as I was concerned that they might be picking up the portion of Sunrise's and Harvard's business that we want to stay away from, i.e. doctors, pain clinics.
Okay. Why did you want to stay away from doctors and pain clinics? Well, let's take the first category.
Sure.
Why did you want to stay away from doctors?
Object to the form. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's, so in terms of Sunrise and Harvard, they had their DEA licenses taken, and their sales were primarily going into doctors and pain clinics. Whenever we saw the increase in Cedardale sales, we were trying to understand where it was coming from, and I wanted to ensure, because Sunrise and Harvard were no longer able to sell, I wanted to ensure that the business that they were servicing, because it had been deemed, not proper, obviously, because the DEA took their license, I wanted to ensure that that business wasn't shifting to another customer of ours, in particular the doctors and the pain clinics.
Okay, and this concern wasn't just, well, stepping back a moment, the general concern with a heavy indexing towards doctors and pain clinics wasn't limited to Cedardale. If another distributor had was shipping most of its product to doctors or pain clinics, that would have been a cause of concern.
Not
right?
necessarily. We were focused on the demand that had been left open by Sunrise and Harvard, which happened to be doctors and pain clinics.
So, just so I understand this though, so you were concerned that Cedardale was taking over Sunrise's doctors and pain clinics.
That's what I said. Yes.
So why wouldn't, or well, strike that. What was it about doctors and pain clinics that concerned you?
I don't know if there was concern specifically about doctors and pain clinics as a rule of thumb, but Sunrise and Harvard's business was doctors and pain clinics, and they were the ones who had their DEA license pulled. So my concern here was that we're obviously not selling product to them anymore because of the DEA license being pulled. However, we were continuing to sell to Cedardale, and we were trying to ascertain if Cedardale's increase in sales was a result of the vacuum that had been created by Sunrise and Harvard going out of the market. And because they primarily service doctors and pain clinics, I noted that in the email.
And so if it turned out Cedardale was servicing doctors, but it was servicing doctors that were different than Sunrise and Harvard, that would not have been of concern to you?
Objective form.
Yeah, I don't, again, Cedardale was one of the ones that we did end up shutting down within, let's say, 2 months of this. So I obviously didn't find anything in this particular analysis, and I can't speak to exactly what happened in those 2 months, but we obviously found something that was concerning with regards to Cedardale to the point that we stopped shipping them.
Well, you stopped shipping to them for 2010, correct?
According to the document that was published in 2010, we had stopped shipping to them for 2010.
Okay.
And I think that you and I have already settled on the fact that I don't know what happened in 2011 because I was not with the company anymore.
So in terms of the concern with doctors and pain clinics, though, were those two categories that you were concerned with?
I think that you and I have already discussed that.
Sure, and
so
I'm still not clear on it, though.
obviously, because you keep asking me. So in this particular email, I said, as I was concerned that they might be picking up the portion of Sunrise's and Harvard's business. And for those two particular accounts, they were servicing doctors and pain clinics. I don't know if doctors and pain clinics were an issue as a broad spectrum, but for Sunrise and Harvard business, the doctors and pain clinics they were servicing obviously created issues because they got their DEA license pulled. When I saw an increase with Cedardale sales, my concern was that was an increase as a result of those doctors and pain clinics going to Cedardale. I ran the chargeback data and I could see all of the sales were going through independent retail, which then confirmed to me that they were not picking up Sunrise and Harvard's business.
And so if you had a distributor that, let's say, was shipping primarily to West Virginia, and 100% of its clientele, its customers were pain clinics, that wouldn't necessarily be a concern because they weren't Harvard or Sunrise's pain clinics.
Why?
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really challenging question to answer. First of all, you noted West Virginia specifically, and I don't know anything about the West Virginia market. I don't think I can answer that question.
Well, so let me phrase this another way. The fact that a distributor does, let's say, 90% of its business with pain clinics is not necessarily a cause of concern for you?
Whenever I was writing this email, I don't know. I can't say that it would or wouldn't be.
Well, so in terms of whether the doctors and pain clinics as a categorical matter were of concern. I mean, that's what I'm trying to get at.
I understand what you're trying to get at, and I'm telling you that in this particular email, I was focused on the shift from Sunrise and Harvard to potentially Cedardale, and in this particular email, I was addressing the fact that that was not what was happening.
And so is your testimony then that you didn't have any categorical concerns about doctors or pain clinics? You were only concerned about the specific doctors and pain clinics that were serviced by Sunrise and Harvard?
From this particular email, that is the case.
Okay. So if you had another distributor that had a large percentage of pain clinics in Florida, but they were pain clinics that were different than Sunrise or Harvard's, that wouldn't have been of concern to you?
Object to the form.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I understand that
No,
testimony.
I can't speak to if it would or wouldn't be.
Well, what information would you need to determine whether or not it's problematic for a distributor to be shipping primarily to pain clinics?
Yeah, I don't know. I would tell you that this was August of 2010, and this was when we were just at the infancy of starting to dive into this information and understand. I left in 2011. What I will say is I can't speak categorically, like you want me to concerns about doctors and pain clinics. What I will say is we started to identify that there was issues within this particular product, and we took steps to stop shipping it within the next 2 months. So whether or not that's driven by doctors or pain clinics, I can't speak to that, but we definitely identified what we perceived to be problem distributors.
And your basis for identifying the problem distributors largely
It hinged
Term.
on Florida, but I can't specifically say if it hinged on doctors or pain clinics, which is your question to me.
Well, and it hinged both on Florida and those customers in Florida, right?
It hinged on Florida and the particular wholesalers that were selling a disproportionate amount of oxycodone into the state of Florida.
Okay. And you don't recall concerns with any other state other than Florida?
Florida is, I mean, seriously, this has been 8 years ago. The thing that sticks with me is Florida. I can't remember discussing other states.
Now, just in terms of the mechanics of what's happening in this email, so Jim Roush, who we've discussed, has identified an order that has been flagged as suspicious. Is that accurate?
He's asking why there's an increase in their usage.
Yes. So this order. Well, how did this order come to Jim's attention?
I can't speak to that. I don't know. It says we just received another order from Cedardale. It says, did you find anything on their increased usage? So Jim is seeing an increase in their orders versus what they historically purchased, it appears.
Are you familiar with the term peculiar order?
I am.
Okay, what does that mean to you?
It was part of the suspicious order monitoring process.
Okay. And was part of Jim Roush's role to identify peculiar orders and then gather information on those orders?
Jim was in customer service, so he was processing the orders, yes.
Okay. And so he's an order has been identified for him as peculiar, and he's now coming to you to ask for additional information on that order. Is that accurate?
I don't see that we noted it as peculiar in here. He sent over an Excel attachment, and he asked me if we'd found out anything on their increased usage. So he's asking about their increase in usage. I don't see peculiar being referenced in here.
Okay. But this is an order that was being subject to additional scrutiny, was it not?
It was an order that he had questions on, so he was
Okay.
following up on.
And who had the authority to determine whether or not to either fill the order or decline it?
It was a combination of factors. I would be evaluating it from a business perspective to see and to give him my feedback in terms of whether or not, from a business perspective, it made sense. But essentially, he would be adhering to the suspicious order monitoring process, and I don't remember the details of that.
Now, when you say you were evaluating it from a business perspective, though, the top email that you drafted and sent to Jim, I mean, those are compliance concerns, right? That's not a business perspective.
So maybe business perspective isn't necessarily the right word. From a data perspective, I was able to pull the data and start to help him tell the story about what was happening within that particular customer.
And so when you indicated that you were evaluating the order from a business perspective,
I think we agreed it wasn't necessarily business, that we're going to say from a data perspective.
yes, and I'm trying to understand what it means to evaluate an order from a data perspective.
Well, I had the visibility into, so I was able to pull the data. So it says here, I evaluated everything we have shipped them from a historical perspective versus all chargebacks we have received. So I was able to run that data to look and see, look at the numbers, look at the data.
But there was also some quantitative aspect to this, because in addition to looking at the numbers, you were also looking at the identity of the new business that Cedardale was gathering, correct? Because you concluded that Cedardale wasn't taking over the doctors and pain clinics from Sunrise and Harvard, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So it wasn't just looking at numbers, it was also making a decision about whether you were comfortable with the pharmacies or with the end purchasers that were being serviced by the distributor, correct?
It was me making a statement to him that the business that they were picking up was not coming from Sunrise or Harvard's lost business as a result of the DEA license being taken away.
And if it had come out the other way, meaning you had determined that the business was coming from the doctors and the pain clinics, presumably you would have stopped the order, correct?
It would have raised additional concerns about those orders and about that customer.
Okay. So who would have had the authority to stop the order at that point?
I don't remember who had the authority. There was a process that was in place that we adhered to, but I honestly can't remember what the ultimate authority was for this.
But your email to Jim is that you don't have any concerns about this order. Is that the substance of it?
From my perspective, I was letting him know that the sales that we were seeing an increase on for Cedardale were not the result of Sunrise and Harvard being unable to ship to those customers, so they were shifting to Cedardale.
Okay. And presumably you didn't have any other concerns about the increase in order size, right?
Again, I stated in here that the order increases had not come from the lost business at Sunrise and Harvard, and it was a result of independent retail.
Yes, so you didn't have any concerns with the increase.
I noted that I didn't have concerns about it coming from Sunrise and Harvard.
Okay. And so do you know if anyone else reviewed the increase in the order size?
I don't remember what the process was in terms of who else would have been evaluating this after I sent this email.
And do you know if you ever ascertained who the customers were that Cedardale was now servicing?
I don't know that we did.
Okay.
I can't speak to that.
We're past the top of the hour. Can we take a quick break?
Sure.
Stand by, please. Remove your microphones. Okay, the time is 2:06 p.m. Calling off the record. Okay, we are back on the record. The time is 2:22 p.m.
Okay, so I'd like to mark this.
Yes.
So this is an email chain that you're on the bottom email. It's from Kathy Stewart to Karen Harper, and then the bottom email that you're on is from Kathy Stewart to Karen Harper, Bill Ratliff, and you're CC'd along with various other people.
Okay.
The Bates number is MKT1290041. So if you could review the cover email, please.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, so this is a 2009 email, and its title is Sunrise Chargeback Summary. Do you recall receiving this email?
I don't, but I see my name on there.
Okay.
So.
And as you will recall, Sunrise was one of the distributors that the DEA shut down.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. So looking at the top email, it says, here's the other file. The doctor in question is column CX.
Okay.
You see that? And then if you look at the chargeback data, that doctor is identified in, the Bates number for that one is going to be 290048.
Got
is
it.
the page, or column CX. And actually, taking a step back, do you know why this spreadsheet summary or this chargeback summary was prepared?
I don't remember, no.
Okay. If I were to tell you that it was prepared in connection with an audit that was being performed on Sunrise, would that jog your recollection at all?
I have a recollection of us doing an audit on Sunrise, but I, again, don't know, I don't remember this particular document or information.
Okay. Now, looking to column CX and the doctor that's highlighted, you'll see that it's Dr. Schultz.
Okay?
Are you familiar with Dr. Schultz?
No.
Okay. Would it surprise you to know that he's currently serving a lengthy prison sentence in a Florida prison?
I guess it would surprise me. I don't know him, so.
Okay.
Okay.
So Dr. Schultz, though, has been flagged.
Okay.
And his purchase is 0.6 kilograms, or I think 612. I'm not sure exactly what the units are. Do you know what the units are for this?
Well, it says in her email, the subject physician purchased the equivalent of 0.6, and it says kg, which means kilograms. So if you look at your column CX that you're referring to, it says 612,000. So it's the 0.6 kilograms referenced in the email.
And what is the 612,000? Is that tablets? Is that molecules? Is that?
That's the kilos in the email. 0.6?
Oh no, it's 0.6, but so that's 612.
So she divided
grams?
it. I'm assuming, I'm not really good at conversion of metrics, but that's your, I guess it's 612,000, would that be grams, and it converts to 0.6 kilos? I'm not good at this type of math.
Okay, fair enough.
But this is the, if you look at your email that you gave to me, the 0.6 kilos in the last line ties to what's in column CX, row 3.
Okay. Now, if you will look at column CW, that is right next to Schultz, you see that's Dr. Shook.
I see that, yes.
Okay, and the amount he's ordering is essentially 12.6 kilograms,
That's-
or
that's
12 million, whatever
grams.
that unit is.
I think it's milligrams.
Is it
Just to
milligrams?
clear the record, yeah.
Thank you.
Fair enough. So he's ordering 12 million milligrams of product, which, as you can note from the email, is that is the largest out of all of these customers. Isn't that large number of concern?
I don't know how many kilograms service the entire oxy market, so I don't know from a relative measure if 12.6 kilograms is a lot.
But in terms of all of Sunrise's other customers, 12.6 kilograms is the most, and that's what the cover email indicates, right?
Yeah, the email says that the equivalent of 12.6 kilograms, and that's nearly 2 kilograms more than the next closest purchaser.
Okay. And so, they flagged Dr. Schultz for, 612 milligrams. Dr. Shook is at 12,597,000 milligrams. Shouldn't that raise a red flag?
I don't know that it didn't. So if you look at the email, it says here's the other file. The doctor in question is in column CX. So it indicates to me that this email is part of a larger conversation. So I don't know, because otherwise we wouldn't have just flagged Schultz in column CX for having purchased 0.6 kilos. You're correct, because the guy right next to him purchased 12.6. So it leads me to believe that there was some other questions being asked about Dr. Schultz, perhaps related to why he's incarcerated now. And we had pulled the data to try to give information for that. And again, this is assumptions because I only have this one email here.
Okay. But just looking at this chargeback data, if you were going to perform an audit of Sunrise, isn't one of the questions you would ask in that audit, what was going on with Dr. Shook, just because of the large volume of his order?
While I would agree with you 100% that the volume that he purchased is large in comparison to the other doctors on this list, that ultimately would be Karen Harper determining what kind of questions would be executed during an audit of Sunrise.
Well, but would you agree that the sheer volume, 12.6 kilograms, that volume in and of itself is, at minimum, makes this, puts it in the suspicious or peculiar category that requires further inquiry?
Not necessarily. And I think what you and I just talked about is I don't know what the total market size of Oxy is in aggregate. So I don't know what 12.6 is relative. I think what this does tell me is he's purchasing the most product through Sunrise, and he obviously is pulling the most product through Sunrise, but as it relates to 12.6 kilograms being a lot, I don't have a reference point for that.
Okay, and so what other data then would you want to gather to determine whether or not Dr. Shook should be subject to additional inquiry?
I think that would be a question that you would need to ask Karen Harper. She was the one that was in charge of performing the audits for our wholesalers and distributors.
Okay.
So in terms of looking at this from a marketing perspective, if I were to look at the numbers, I would agree that Dr. Shook is purchasing the most across all of these doctors, and that would warrant, to me, a second look, but I don't know what was actually done, nor do I know how the audit would actually be performed.
Well, I'm sorry, and going back to that prior exhibit, you don't have any knowledge as to whether or not Dr. Shook was part of the audit that was performed at Sunrise, do you?
I was not, no, I do not know.
Okay. Okay, so this is a letter from the Drug Enforcement Administration to Mallinckrodt, and its base number is MNKT1421084. So could you take a minute to review this letter?
Sure. Thank you. Okay.
So this is a letter from the DEA to Mallinckrodt. Do you recall ever reviewing this?
I don't remember.
So you don't have a recollection of ever receiving this letter?
This was from 2007, which was almost 12 years ago. I don't remember if I did or didn't review this letter.
Okay. So can you read the bottom paragraph that I've highlighted into the record?
Sure. The regulation specifically states that suspicious orders include orders of an unusual size, orders deviating substantially from a normal pattern, and orders of an unusual frequency. These criteria are disjunctive and are not all-inclusive. For example, if an order deviates substantially from a normal pattern, the size of the order does not matter, and the order should be reported as suspicious. Likewise, a registrant need not wait for a, quote, normal pattern, end quote, to develop over time before determining whether a particular order is suspicious. The size of an order alone, whether or not it deviates from a normal pattern, is enough to trigger the registrant's responsibility to report the order as suspicious. The determination of whether an order is suspicious depends not only on the ordering patterns of the particular customer, but also on the patterns of the registrant's customer base and the patterns throughout the relevant segment of the regulated industry.
Okay. So with respect to suspicious orders, I mean, do you agree with this paragraph?
Check to the form. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I don't agree or disagree. This was the DEA's interpretation of a suspicious order.
And was this consistent with your understanding of what suspicious orders were when you were a product manager at Mallinckrodt?
This was the information provided by the DEA, and we had a compliance program in place that was reflective of DEA criteria.
And so this information was ultimately provided to you as well, correct?
I have an understanding of what a suspicious order is, and this mimics my understanding.
Okay. And going back to Dr. Shook, they note that the size of an order alone, whether or not it deviates from a normal pattern, is enough to trigger the registrant's responsibility to report the order as suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Shook presumably would have fit that criteria, wouldn't he?
Check to the form.
I think that when we talked about Dr. Shook before, we agreed that 12.6 kilograms of oxy, we don't have a relative measure in terms of if that is indeed a large order. We also don't have any documentation. I don't have any documentation that tells me if we did or didn't go after Dr. Shook. So I don't think that I can answer the question that you've asked properly.
Okay. Well, and at a minimum, though, I mean, you weren't involved in any investigation of Dr. Shook, and you didn't have anything to do with looking at Dr. Shook.
Well, I wasn't involved in the investigations, period. That was in Karen Harper's group. So I don't have any knowledge of Dr. Shook being investigated or not being investigated.
Well, so then why were you sent this summary worksheet? I'm sorry, I've gone back to the previous exhibit.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're looking at, and I understand what you're asking. There were a lot of people copied on this. I was the product manager in this particular product. Let's see here, Vic was the sales manager for this account. Jim was the customer service manager for this account. George Saffold was the head of customer service. John Adams, the head of sales. There are a lot of people copied on this, but you can see it was directly sent to Karen Harper and Bill Ratliff, who will be handling the investigation.
Okay. Then going back to this DEA letter, so can you read the top paragraph of the second page, please?
Sure. Registrants that rely on rigid formulas to define whether an order is suspicious may be failing to detect suspicious orders. For example, a system that identifies orders as suspicious only if the total amount of a controlled substance ordered during 1 month exceeds the amount ordered the previous month by a certain percentage or more is insufficient. The system fails to identify orders placed by a pharmacy if the pharmacy placed unusually large orders from the beginning from the beginning of its relationship with the distributor. Also, the system would not identify orders as suspicious if the order were solely for one highly abused controlled substance if the orders never grew substantially. Nevertheless, ordering one highly abused controlled substance and little or nothing else deviates from the normal pattern of what pharmacies generally order.
Okay. Was this your understanding of the inquiry that Mallinckrodt was supposed to undertake with respect to suspicious orders?
It was.
Okay. In other words, that it wasn't adequate to just rely on a numeric formula, but that additional inquiry should be performed as well. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think that's what you've seen over the course of the documents that we've reviewed in terms of looking at the data, asking questions. So I think that is 100% the interpretation that we had of this.
Okay. And that interpretation was in place, as of the date of this letter, which was December 2007. Is that correct?
Object to the form. Go ahead.
I can't speak to what was or wasn't in place in 2007. I mean, we had a suspicious order monitoring program that supported the DEA requirements.
Okay, and that suspicious order monitoring program should presumably comply with the requirements in this letter.
I'm not in compliance. I was in marketing, so I can't speak to the exact program itself. All I can say is based on this letter, we had a suspicious order monitoring program that reflected the requirements of the DEA.
So, do we have 387? Thank you. Oh, no, wait, I'm sorry, that's... Yes. Sounds right. Let's see what they do. Okay, so this is an email chain or an email from you to Cheryl Nelson and Mark Montgomery, CC and various other people. And the Bates number is MNKT1 387257.
Okay.
Okay, and so I'd like to start on the back page, which is, I think, information relating to the orders.
Okay.
And if I wanted to, there's a bunch of numbers or rows of numbers towards the bottom of each of the orders. If I wanted to get an understanding of the volume of the order, what numbers should I be looking at? Is it the, for example, the row that's starting at 577101? Is the volume the 4,200?
So I think you would need to look across the headings on the top where it says item code, quantity shipped, canceled unit, extended price, slip, packet or picking slip date. So if you look at those headings, it would say item code quantity. So naturally you would look to the second column, which would be 708.
Okay. And the same would be true for the bottom. So the column that starts either 708 or 588 that's the volume of, is it bottles or is it pills? I take it it's bottles?
That would be my assumption. It's really challenging to tell just because it's the way the email collapsed it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it would be bottles.
Okay. So these orders are a couple thousand bottles. Just sort of glancing at the numbers quickly. And so the email from Cheryl Nelson to you and Mark Montgomery, when she says Mr. Hall will send a new order on Monday and increase the quantities by 50%, the new order, the volume for the new order then is going to be an increase of 50% over several thousand bottles, correct?
If that was what their normal order was and they were going to increase by 50%, then yes.
Okay. So at the top of the paragraph there is, do you see the sentence saying, we have experienced considerable diversion tampering issues with regard to this customer in NC? What were the diversion and tampering issues?
I read that sentence, sir, and to be honest with you, I don't know what the issues were with this customer. I don't have a recollection.
Okay. Isn't it problematic to be shipping, thousands of bottles to a customer that has experienced considerable diversion tampering issues?
I can't speak to that. If they've experienced them in the past, I don't know.
Well, so who was responsible for making the decision whether to ship this to them?
In terms of this email itself, I don't know why why it was led with that particular sentence, but if you read the context of the email itself, so we had made obviously the decision at some point to continue shipping them. And if you read the context of the email, this was on November 12th. So they were placing additional buys to cover for when they were going to be closed or didn't have people in the office for the week of Thanksgiving. So the email itself was just about a order increasing quantities because they wouldn't be ordering during that week of the 23rd. In terms of the decision to continuing to ship to North Carolina in that sentence, I can't speak to that because I don't have a recollection on it.
Well, but I understand the timing issue that's being raised by the order. I guess my question is, you have a customer that, according to Cheryl, you've experienced considerable diversion tampering issues, and yet you're still shipping to them thousands of bottles of I believe it's is it Oxy 30 or what is?
Well, I think that you need to be really careful on that because there's a number of SKUs that are listed on the back of that email. So I'm counting here. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 SKUs, I think, on the first order, different SKUs, not just Oxy 30. So I think we need to be really careful about categorizing this order being an aggregate of thousands of bottles for Oxy 30.
Well, so, and do you know which SKUs would have been the Oxy 30s? Well, or stepping back, which SKUs would have been the Oxys?
That part, no, I don't know. Based on the context of Mark's email and my email, it looks like it was methylphenidate, which is a non-opioid, oxycodone, and morphine.
Okay, so it's those three products that would have been covered by these SKUs.
I can't 100% say that, but I can tell you that those three products are at least included in those SKUs.
Okay. So you're still going to be shipping Oxy and morphine to this customer, notwithstanding the considerable diversion and tampering issues. And so I guess my question is, you know, who made that decision?
And I think my answer to you is that I don't know because I don't have a recollection of this situation.
But you're signing off on the orders for the methyl and the Oxy, correct?
At some point, someone had made the decision to continue shipping them. The context of the email is not about the diversion tampering issues. The context of the email is saying that their orders are going to increase because they're not going to order the following week. And that was the part that I was saying I'm okay with.
Okay. Do you know what investigation was done regarding the diversion and tampering issues?
If I don't remember the situation, how could I possibly tell you what was done? I don't know.
Okay, so you have no idea. You have no idea what investigation, if any, was done with respect to
I think I've
this client.
stated to that same question, I have no recollection of this situation, so I cannot speak to the investigation, no.
Okay. And just to be clear, you don't even know if an investigation was done because you have no recollection one way
How
or the
could
other.
I tell you yes or no if I don't have a recollection?
Well, I just want to make sure the record's clear on this.
I think it's pretty explicit, yeah.
Do we have 449, 467? Great. Okay, so this is an email chain with the Bates number MNKT1 449467, and it's an email exchange between you and John Adams, among others.
Okay.
Okay, so this email chain is, well, the top email is John Adams forwarding this email chain to you. Who was John Adams?
In 2008, I don't know if he moved into head of sales. I think he was head of sales by this point.
Okay, and why is he forwarding this to you?
I don't know. I don't know why. You would have to ask John.
Okay. Now, the email at the bottom, it says, "Dear Karen, please be informed that Rochester Wholesale Drug has secured a new account, Old Bridge Drugs, who will be using Mallinckrodt's Oxy 30 milligrams. The account's monthly use is approximately 380 bottles monthly." Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. So because of that increase, would that have triggered the peculiar order screens?
It could have potentially, if the increase was large enough in relation to what Rochester Drug typically ordered, it would have increased their order quantities, therefore flagging, a difference to historics. So, yes.
Okay. And because you were the person in charge of the data, would that then have come to you as or would someone have requested information from you? Is that why you're getting this email?
So as a product manager, there's a couple of reasons that I can suspect that I would have gotten the email. I also did forecasting for this particular product. So if there was an increase in usage, I would need to know that in terms of factoring in. I also was the one evaluating when they got an order that was higher than what the historic average had been, it would be sent to me, and I would need to evaluate. And so if this order did get sent to me, this would be documentation showing the reason why.
Okay. And actually, Karen's email right above the one I just read, it says, "Heads up from the suspicious order monitoring perspective." Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. Now, you indicate, or I think you just testified that this documentation would be showing the reason why. Was that information important in the context of the suspicious order monitoring that was being done?
I can't speak to any work that Karen did around the actual customer. What I can say is this was sent to me to let me know that if there was an increase in demand from Rochester Drug, at least I'm guessing, that this was the background as to why there was an increase.
Okay. And do you know if any investigation was done into the new account? The new account is identified at the very bottom email on.
Sure.
I'm sorry, it's the very last email on 449469.
I don't know. I don't know.
So we're talking about Old Bridge Drugs, and they want to order 38,000 units a month of Oxy 30. In terms of the order, the fact that it's an Oxy 30 would trigger a heightened concern, correct?
This was in October of 2008. So Oxy 30 was part of our suspicious order monitoring program. So that's part of the reason why this was generated.
Okay. Do you know if any analysis was done of the ratio that Old Bridge Drugs was ordering with respect to Oxy versus other products?
I don't know the answer to that, no.
Okay. Should that analysis have occurred?
I can't answer that question for you. I don't know.
Do you know if any analysis was done at all with respect to Old Bridge Drugs?
I don't have any recollection. Again, this was 11 years ago.
And do you know if the distributor, I believe it's RDC, do you know if they did any analysis of Old Bridge Drugs?
Again, I'm going to respond to you that I don't know. And again, this was 11 years ago. I don't have a recollection.
based on your experience with the SOM program and your responsibilities at Mallinckrodt, should some investigation have been conducted of overage drugs,
Objection
in
to
your
the form.
opinion?
That would have been a decision made by Karen Harper. And whether or not an investigation was done or not done, I don't know. So I can't answer that question.
If an investigation was done, would you have been involved from a chargeback perspective?
Not on this customer in particular. If this is new volume,
Okay.
because there would not have been chargebacks associated with it yet.
And so this order doesn't seem problematic to you, given that it's Oxy 30 and it's 38,000 units.
Well, I think you need to reference the front page of your email. So it's 380 bottles.
So it's 380 bottles, and it's of Oxy 30. That doesn't seem problematic.
I can't speak to whether it was, I can't tell you if it was problematic or not. I don't have what the total Oxy 30 milligram total bottles being sold was, so I couldn't tell you if 380 would have raised a red flag or not.
Do we have 267735? Yep. There we go.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. And so this is an email involving H.D. Smith and directing your attention, well, it's Mallinckrodt Bates number MNK 267735, and directing your attention to Bates number 267736. You see the email in the middle of the page is from Steve Becker to you. Do you see that?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Why is Steve emailing you?
I had reached out to him about a particular order, so if you go to Exhibit 8862, you can see I forwarded him a PO number. And then it looks like he reached out to Dean Amando and Lynn Soja at H.D. Smith. The order in question with increase was for your California DC. And then Steve is responding, forwarding back to me what Lynn from H.D. Smith had said to him.
Okay, so in terms of understanding the context of this, the order PO 472054618 has been, I guess, identified as an order that requires additional information. Is that fair?
It looks like Steve and I must have had a conversation on it, and then I forwarded it to him, yes.
Okay. And then your email at the top, do you see what that says?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So,
Would you like me to read that?
yes, please.
In order to provide a proper response to the DEA, we need to have some color around why they think the orders are increasing. Did they pick up a new customer? Are other manufacturers having supply issues? Let me know. Thanks.
And so this information is being used in connection with the suspicious order monitoring program, is it not?
It is.
Okay. And so his response to you is on the middle of the first page. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. And so what is his response?
It says orders at H.T. Smith are increasing due to improved contract compliance and additional accounts purchasing from their DC both as primary and on a secondary basis. Also note that other distributors may be limiting distribution in California. ANDA has cut back and Harvard is not shipping.
Okay. So you indicate that orders at H.T. Smith Steve indicates that orders at H.T. Smith are increasing due to improved contract compliance and additional accounts purchasing. Was any investigation done as to who the additional accounts were?
I don't know, because you can see I sent this to Jim Roush and I said, is this okay, ? And I don't know what Jim's response back was in terms of us investigating. I don't know what happened after this.
Okay.
I think it's important to note on this too, that the conversation we had earlier with regards to H.D. Smith, where you had all the questions about the bullet points and how they determined what customers to cut off, that was on August of 2010. And this is October 7th of 2010, so it was 2 months after that. So I think from my perspective, and again, I don't know if an investigation occurred, but this was an account that we had seen go through stringent measures in terms of cutting off multiple accounts to not ship to. So in terms of customers to be concerned with, in terms of shipping and evaluation of pharmacies and who they were shipping to, based on those two documents tied together, I would say H.D. Smith would be less of a concern.
Okay, but that
doesn't answer your question about whether or not an additional investigation occurred. I don't know. It could or couldn't have. It's tough to say because your email that you provided to me ends with Jim, this okay ? So I don't know how Jim responded to that. It was my job as part of this program to reach out to the sales team, to reach out to the account, to get information from them, to provide back in, to give direction to Karen on what next steps she might need to take. Your email doesn't tell me what those steps may or may not have been after this last response.
And if an additional investigation was conducted, it would have been memorialized in email?
I'm sorry?
If an additional investigation was conducted, it would have been memorialized in email,
I
correct?
don't, not necessarily. I don't know if it would or wouldn't have been. I did my part. I reached out to the account. I got the information. I provided it back to Jim. What happened after this, we can't speak to because you don't have a document for me to reference, and I don't know.
And if an additional investigation occurred, though, would you have been involved in it? As a conduit between the
Not
national account
necessarily.
manager?
Not necessarily, no.
Do you think it would have been prudent to at least inquire as to who the additional accounts were that were purchasing, given the concerns that were being raised, particularly with respect to oxycodone by the DEA?
That would have been a decision that would have fallen into compliance.
And so that decision would have been made by who?
So the compliance team, which Karen Harper was at the time leading.
Now, the email also notes that other distributors may be limiting distribution in California, and that ANDA has cut back and Harvard is not shipping. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you know why that was occurring?
I do not know.
Okay.
I don't have a recollection on that.
So
I can tell you as far as Harvard, so the ANDA has cut back. That part I don't have a recollection on. Harvard is not shipping. I think we've spoken to that earlier in terms of Harvard getting their DEA license taken away. So Harvard was unable to ship to any part of the U.S.
Okay, though the sentence also note that other distributors may be limiting distribution in California. Did anyone know why other distributors were limiting their distribution in California?
I think we need to be clear on the wording of that sentence. It says, also note that other distributors may be limiting distribution in California. This is Steve Becker, who's the director of national accounts. That was his opinion. So I don't know that we have any fact or foundation for that sentence, rather than it was just Steve Becker's thoughts.
Well, but this is going to be the basis for evaluating a suspicious order, isn't it?
It's the basis for me understanding why H.D. Smith, the volume has gone up.
So do you know what steps, if any, Steve Becker took to confirm the information he put in this email?
I took this information and provided it to Karen or to Jim, and what he did with that after the fact, I don't know.
Would you have been comfortable approving this order based solely on this information without any follow-up?
I don't think that I was okay with it because I put Jim, this okay, question mark. So I obviously was saying, you know, is this okay? I obviously didn't have a comfort level based on the email.
So in your opinion, some additional investigation was warranted?
I can't say that it was or wasn't. That's why I was asking Jim if this is okay, question mark.
Could I have 264901? So I think it's not that.
Thank you.
So this is an email chain between you and Jim Roush, and it's base numbered MNKT1 264901.
That's- Okay.
Okay. So the bottom email is a little confusing, but my understanding based on the context is that it's a combination of his email to you and your response to him. Is that your understanding as well?
I understand why it was confusing to me as well, but in reading the emails, it does look like the part I look back to the past 2 months appears to be my language for the first two, and then they have 10 days on hand appears to be my response to him for the third line.
So that's my understanding as well. So in terms of this email, Jim is identifying 3 different orders for you. And he's identified one as 85301. I believe the order amount is 12,084, and the average is 4,620. Is that your understanding?
Right, so he's saying the order was for 12,000 and the average order is, or the average demand is 4,600.
Okay. And then for the next order, the order was for 25,440, and the average is 3,616.
That's right.
Okay. And then for the third one, the order was for 85,176, and the average is 28,723.
Okay.
Okay. Now, this distributor, Cardinal, is increasing its orders. It's essentially tripling its orders. Is that fair?
No, I don't think that's fair.
Well, if they're going from, well, they're tripling. It's 3 times the monthly average, or close to 3 times the monthly average. Correct?
According to Karen's data, so she ran this for the past year. So she ran the average for the past year and then compared that to these orders. So it doesn't mean that these orders are necessarily large compared to the business that we were doing with them at the time, but for the average for the past 12 months, they were larger.
Yes. And so if you look at the 12-month average, they're over triple, or they're close to triple that average, right? I mean, comparing 12,084 to 4,620, or 25,000 to 3,600, or 85,000 to 28,000. You know, they're several times larger than the 12-month average.
Or, well, she said the average I ran was over a year, so it could have been more than 12. We don't really know that.
And so your response, what is your response? It's at the very top of the page.
Would you like me to read it?
Yes, please.
Okay. Their orders were severely depressed for the first quarter of the calendar year as they were bleeding down inventories. If you incorporate those orders into the average is going to look light. The orders that you listed below do not appear to be out of line.
And when you say they do not appear to be out of line, they do not appear to be out of line in light of?
Well, I said, if you incorporate those the average is going to look light. I said the orders that you listed below do not appear to be out of line. So that would have meant out of line with the average. Order history.
Well, and I guess when you say they're not out of line, what is your reference point to the out of line? Meaning they are clearly significantly greater than the 12-month average.
They're greater than the 12-month average.
What is your baseline?
Yeah, so I think I addressed that in the first sentence. Their orders were severely depressed for the first quarter of the calendar year, which would have been, so we're in month 9 of 2010, so the first quarter of the calendar year, as they were bleeding down inventories. If you incorporate those orders into the average is going to look light.
And so your solution or your analysis was to just look back at the past 2 months.
Well, I think what I did was after I ran it for the past 2 months, and then I went back, if you say their orders were severely depressed for the first quarter of the calendar year, as they were bleeding down inventories, you can see from that sentence that I went back and looked further back at the sales. I think this is also a really good document to show the push and pull between customer service, the questions that we got back and forth, of me saying that to them and them saying, hey, look, maybe that's not good enough. Can you relook at it again? So I think this is actually a good example of the discussions that we would have prior to releasing orders.
Well, and where does it indicate that you're going back, you're taking into account a broader than 1 year time period?
So I said their orders were severely depressed for the first quarter of the calendar year. So that would have been way more than 2 months prior to September 17th, 2010, which is evidence to me that I went back and I looked at their total ordering pattern. And I said the orders that you listed below do not appear to be out of line.
Because you were discounting the first quarter of the calendar year, essentially.
If you read the sentence, I wouldn't say I was discounting it, but I was taking into account that their orders were severely depressed during the first quarter of the calendar year. And so if you incorporated that into the average is going to look light. It was going to not be reflective of the business that they were actually doing with us.
Well, the business that they were doing with you for the past 2 months, though, because isn't that what your email response is?
I said their order, I don't know how to be more frank with you, I'm sorry. If you incorporate those orders into the average is going to look light. So that indicates that if you put them or you take them back out of the average, then I feel comfortable with the volumes being in line. The other piece of this that you don't know, their orders were severely depressed for the first quarter of the calendar year. They were bleeding down inventories. That can mean a number of things if you look at that. It could have mean that we just won their business and they were transitioning and their orders were light with us as they bled down inventories of the competition. I mean, it's impossible to tell without having additional context. And unfortunately, when I wrote this email, I didn't include the Excel sheet to support it. So unless I had that, I can't give you any more specifics than what I've just shared with you.
But the whole purpose of doing a year-long average is that it takes into account both the large orders and the smaller orders, right? Isn't that why you're
But what
doing
if
it?
we had just transitioned the business to us? So I don't know that from this email. And if that was the case, then if you take into account the time where they were bleeding down inventories, as they bled down their inventories, they wouldn't have been ordering as much from us, and therefore it doesn't mean that they don't have sales out to their customers. It just means that they're not ordering the product from us. And so it would be unfair to incorporate those down months into the average and penalize them on their orders in the month of September.
Well, I don't know if the purpose is to penalize them or not penalize them. I think the purpose is to identify significant increases and then scrutinize the basis for those increases. Is
And
that
I think
fair?
that that's what this document shows, yes.
Okay, so you have a yearly average, which
That,
is
that
listed.
incorporates a quarter of them bleeding down inventories, which we're not certain if that's our product or someone else's, yeah.
And I'm sorry, when you say that this incorporates a quarter of them bleeding down inventories, and you're not certain if that is your product or someone else's, what do you mean by that?
So what this email doesn't tell you, and that's why it's dangerous to take it out of context, what this email doesn't tell you is it says that orders were severely depressed for the first quarter of the calendar year as they were bleeding down inventories. Now what I don't know is, did we just win the business from another manufacturer at that point, and they were bleeding down that current manufacturer's inventories as they transitioned to us? Had we just won the business? I don't know that from looking at this email. So it's tough for me to answer that question.
Well, but why would that make, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be difficult, but why would that make a difference in terms of assessing whether they have their order is a significant increase over, their prior history looking back over an extended time period?
So if an account has inventory on hand, if they have excess inventory on hand, they're still selling out to their customers. That demand is still legitimate. They could still be selling out, or let's say real. That demand could be 15,000 bottles a month, right? But let's say they're sitting on, 50,000 units of inventory at their DC. So they would need to work through that inventory and sell through it to their customer before they would need to order more product from us. So their ordering pattern, even though their true demand to their customers had not changed, because of their inventory management strategies, how much they were ordering from us could have changed. And so if they were working through inventory, let's say if they had an excessive inventory of our product, they had an excess, if they would transition from us, from another manufacturer to us, then they would need to work through that inventory. So I was looking at the first quarter of the calendar year, and I was looking at their inventories because we did have visibility to our inventory with them. And you're able to see that their ordering pattern was depressed during that time frame. So their demand to their customers hadn't necessarily changed, but their ordering pattern to us wasn't reflective of that demand. So that's why I excluded it from the analysis whenever I was talking to him about using a 12-month average here. I don't.
And so part of your analysis, though, depends on why they were bleeding down inventories. Is that fair? Their orders were severely depressed for the first quarter of the calendar year, but part of that turns on why they were severely depressed. Is that a fair statement?
Their orders were, I don't know, I'm sorry. Their orders were severely depressed. So in terms of inventory management, when you have an excess of inventory, you're not going to be ordering more of it. So we had visibility into Cardinal's inventories, at least particularly for our product, and we could have discussions with them about reasons why they might not have been ordering. And I don't know what that was because I don't have the context. All I have is this email. But what I'm trying to say to you is just because they weren't ordering from us in the first quarter of the calendar year doesn't mean that they didn't continue to have the same demand to their customers. So I could not take their ordering pattern from that first quarter and use that as an indication for what their true ordering pattern was as an average rule of thumb. And that's why it was problematic when you used the past 12 months and didn't account for that depression in the first quarter.
So would one solution, though, to have gone back further than 12 months? I mean, Cardinal is a major distributor. It's a major client.
Right, and I would argue with you that I did. So we went back 2 months initially, and then it looks like we did go back 12 months, and that's how I was able to identify that the first quarter was an anomaly, that needed to be removed.
But instead of doing 2 months versus 12 months, couldn't you have tried doing, for example, 24 months?
So I did do 2 months, and then you see Jim pushing back saying that's not very far back. So this to me is a document of evidence of this system working. I pulled 2 months. He's saying, hey, Kate, that's probably not enough. You probably should look at it further back. And then I did. So this was the back and forth, which is evidence of the system to me working because there was dialogue there.
And when you say you looked further back, you're getting that from your email, from the fact that you're saying that the first quarter of the calendar year they were bleeding down inventories. That's your basis for saying you looked back?
That's all that I have to go on because it's the only email documentation you've provided me to.
Well, I'm trying, I mean, so are you saying one of the things that's possible is you went and you recalculated the average over 24 months? Is that?
I can't answer that because I don't know.
Okay, so it's entirely possible then that you didn't go back further than a year, you just looked at their ordering history and concluded that they were bleeding down inventories, right?
To the form.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Is your issue the fact that I used 2 months initially, or is the issue that the 12-month average might have been less than these order quantities back here? I
Well,
guess I'm
it's-
confused about your questions.
My questions are sort of going to both, which is you go back 2 months and that's not, and Jim has concerns about that. So your response to him is to say, well, the orders were severely depressed for the first few months of this calendar year. And so this average, doesn't reflect their current demand. And I guess if the concern is that the 12-month average isn't the adequate baseline, why not use a broader, longer average, for example, 24 months?
Do you know how dynamic the generic industry is, and especially like with regards to Cardinal? So within so much could have changed within 24 months. You would never go back that far because it could not be indicative of, we could have picked up the business with Cardinal during that time frame. Cardinal could have picked up new accounts during that time frame. 24 months, it would not be indicative of current business today. In looking at this, their demand to us was light in the first quarter because they had excess inventory that they were selling through. If you incorporated the first quarter into the average, then the numbers that they were ordering as of September 17th, 2010 would look large. My response back to him is if you take that out, the orders that you listed below do not appear to be out of line. Unfortunately, I don't have the document that shows the analysis of what I did. So all I can tell you is based on this email, what I can guess.
Okay, so if there actually was a significant increase in demand over the past 3 months,
Not necessarily.
but if there was, should that have been investigated?
It should have been investigated at that point.
Okay.
We've been going about an hour. Can we take a quick break?
Sure. Why don't we take a break?
Okay, stand by, remove your microphones. The time is 3:27 p.m.